This is Duke University.
I was intrigued for two reasons. First, on the face of it, as I will explain, not much about the role of fast fashion in the nail salon makes intuitive sense in terms of economics or utility. And secondly, books like Kleins and Siegel's did not prepare us to picture fast fashion consumers to be working class, undocumented immigrant women dressing for their service industry jobs. So, over the last several decades in the New York metropolitan area, has seen over a 40% rise in the number of nail salons. I don't know if that's comparable in Europe. It's a huge explosion. As Millyanne Kang details in her groundbreaking study of nail salon workers in New York City, the boom in the nail salon industry is at the intersection of an expanding service economy, the commercialization of regimes of hygiene and adornment that used to be performed privately, new forms of feminized, racialized labor, and massive waves of immigration by the Asian women who mostly occupy these jobs. Kang has argued that the salons can be grouped into three distinct categories. One type is characterized by, quote, high service body labor involving physical pampering and emotional attentiveness, serving mostly middle and upper class white female customers, end of quote. So the salon in which I have been collecting ethnographies in most ways fits this description to a T. Fancy branding polishes, glossy fashion magazines, tasteful music, and aromatherapy distilled into clients' pedicure baths offer some concrete clues. In fact, one of the only ways in which the salon is atypical is in the worker's dress. The norm in most salons is for workers to wear either actual uniforms supplied by the salon or unified dress, usually black pants and a black shirt, not necessarily supplied by the salon, for labor that is, among other things, toxic, messy, and extremely rough on clothes. So when I asked Anita, how did it happen that you guys wore your own clothes in the salon? Was that something the owner wanted you to do? Was it something that you guys asked if you could do? She responded, the dress we wear there was not our wish. Our owner doesn't want us to wear uniforms. She simply doesn't like us wearing uniforms. She always requests us to look a little fashionable, though. At this moment, I began to feel like I had some idea of what was going on. I wasn't precisely sure how having fashionably dressed workers would confer economic benefits on the salon owner. Certainly the client's constant compliments of the workers' clothes seemed to be structuring or lubricating their at once intimate, commercialized, and hierarchical exchanges in some crucial way. But I began to see how the owner's economic investment in her workers' fashionable bodies could be the central question of my inquiry. And on the one hand, Sunita confirmed this precisely. In my opinion, she wrote to me on Facebook, the owner wants us to be fashionable to attract customers. However, at the same time, Sunita and the other women vehemently insisted, no matter how hard I pressed, that this was only part of the story of their fast fashion use in the nail salon. The workers were emphatic that they vastly preferred wearing their own clothes. In fact, the word Sunita routinely used was freedom. Generally, she spoke of it as a highly qualified freedom, as in it gives us a little freedom, and it feels like a kind of freedom, but a freedom nonetheless. One woman volunteered that she had gone so far as to leave another salon to work in this one because she preferred to wear her own clothes. In a long exchange in a group interview in which I said I thought for the owner of the salon to require the women to dress fashionably and to invest in clothes that were likely to be irreparably stained for her own economic benefit was coercive, the women got frustrated with me. Is it really better even though it's expensive for you, I asked? Nina, valued by me and by her colleagues for the fact that she was always the most frank, responded, Jessamyn, it's much better, much, much. Her answer was again echoed by the whole group, much, it's much better, much. When I followed up with Sunita, she said, we are glad not to wear uniforms. We feel like if we wore uniforms, we're wearing boundaries or something. It doesn't feel comfortable. And with uniforms, it's always like black pants and black shirt. It was much, much better to wear whatever we like, to use our own clothes, our own comfortable dresses. I like all these bright colors. Our dress is important. Sunita's language of comfort, ownership, colorfulness, boundaries, import was something worth paying attention to. Still, it was hard for me to understand the basic economics of the workers' expenditures on fast fashion. The mask of luxury that high-service salons traffic in and their high prices shouldn't confuse us about the difficulty of this kind of labor or its poor pay. As Kang strongly argues, a salon with an enhanced aura of luxury does not necessarily translate into better working conditions or better wages for workers. In fact, she argues that sometimes it's quite the opposite. This is in large part because in high-service salons, workers are paid a low hourly wage and expectation that they will be well tipped. Body service workers' dependence on clients for tips intensifies an already fraught relationship to the intimate publics of high-service salons. And the system also doesn't necessarily translate into a higher income. As it turns out, the clients who visit these salons do not, in general, tip particularly well. The women told me they could expect to earn about $25 to $35 in tips during a 10-hour weekday and $45 to $50 on a weekend day. Coupled with this, the women who work in the salon are under intense economic pressure. The women I interviewed had found themselves in the nail technician's chair because they support family members who have remained in Nepal. Two of the women I met had left their young children behind with relatives in hopes of providing better lives for their kids with money sent home from the US, even if that meant they wouldn't see them again for many years. The tremendous difference in the cost of living in Nepal and New York means that even a portion of a nail salon worker's salary can do a great deal to improve the daily lives of her families in Kathmandu. Remittances provide almost a quarter of Nepal's GDP, and the figure is probably substantially higher as remittances are routinely underestimated. The rule of thumb is to add 40% to all official figures. The women were also supporting themselves and often additional dependents in New York City. In light of this, I wondered, what could wearing fast fashion possibly offer the women who labor in the salon that it is powerful enough that it is worth the investment of their marginal disposable income? Why fashion and not some other consumer good? Was there, in fact, an economic benefit to the workers if they were fashionably dressed? And are there other less tangible benefits to the workers? The degree of complexity in the intense fashion micro-subculture of the salon is such that I can't even scratch it this afternoon. But I want to start by taking seriously Sunita's insistence that dressing fashionably is a way she and her colleagues exert some kind of freedom, some little freedom. As I've been trying to suggest, body service work is certainly not the worst job in the world, but it's also not one of the best. It's highly toxic, physically and emotionally taxing, poorly paid, and the hours are long. The women's undocumented status is a source of constant anxiety, and it also makes finding a better job almost impossible. In addition, there are particular hardships for the Hindu women who work in the salon. As the scholar Krishnendu Ray, whose scholarship is on immigrant laborers in New York City's food service industry, wrote to me in an email exchange, for Hindus, the feet are the most important and visible site of assigning ritual hierarchy. Every time I see my elders, including my parents, I touch their feet in a gesture of pleasurable subservience by signifying that I take the dust from their feet to put it on my head so that they can bless me in exchange. What happens when such a symbolically charged body part as feet enters into a commercial exchange? There must be immense value contradictions here. Touching other people's feet for money but not for blessings is incomprehensible, not disgusting, unbearable. Given that this is a job that these workers have found that they must do to support themselves and to fulfill their family obligations, I want to suggest that the use of fast fashion ameliorates, to a certain degree, some of the daily experience of hardship for these women. In particular, I want to suggest that when women put on stylish clothing to perform body service labor, they reinforce a sense of dignity that's perpetually assaulted by the conditions of their workplace. And I want to suggest that putting on style accomplishes this in surprising ways. So, first of all, it's worth establishing that the women claim a sense of themselves as fashionable in the first place. Here's Deepa on the subject. Everyone always says Deepa is so fashionable. Maybe because of the way I dress up. You ask me what I like about fashion? You ask me if I like fashion? Yeah, I love it. I have a very good eye for fashion. Like Deepa, the other women are proud of their fashionability and of each other's fashionability. Everybody has her own quality, Zhang put it, referring to her colleagues' individual style. The women are also emphatic that they did not acquire their fashionability when they migrated to the US. They brought it with them. As Deepa explained, speaking of family members who are all in Nepal, my sister, she's also really fashionable. And my mom was really fashionable. Short skirts, big goggle sunglasses, block heels. At the time, nobody wore like that. She used to wear all this stuff. Maybe I was inspired by my mother, the way she dressed us. Whatever she used to buy for me was perfect. She has a really good eye. I am so proud. The conversation with Deepa took place in the salon in front of clients. Deepa was wearing an electric blue tiger-striped mini dress from H&M. In the context of the salon, the aesthetic sensibility of beauty and fashion that Deepa was attributing to her family in Nepal should be the privilege of the client. But I want to suggest that when she made this speech, she was actively constructing and performing a genealogy of beauty and fashion that contravenes the one in which the clients who visit the salon are steeped. Because she was clearly saying that her historied aesthetic sensibility of beauty and fashion is not rooted in the salon culture to which clients are committed, or even more broadly in present-day US culture. She is not parroting contemporary American ideas of fashion and beauty when she puts on style to work at the salon. Rather, she's exercising an aesthetic sensibility that she constructs as a continuance of her family's traditions of beauty and fashion practices in Nepal. For Deepa, putting on fashionable dress to work at the salon is also therefore not an emulation of the client's class standing as might be imagined. That's not what's in all those bags from H&M. Deepa's attachment is to her own familiar class caste standing in the cultural capital in Nepal. In Deepa's construction, if fashion belongs to her family and her, it doesn't belong to the salon's owner, who belongs to a different ethnic group, and it doesn't originate with her. Thus, Deepa's alternative narrative of the history of fashion distances herself from the salon's owner's attempt to harness her employees' fashionability as an economic benefit for the business, even as Deepa fulfills, to the letter, the owner's injunction that she wear a stylish dress. Surely Deepa was borrowing from the immense cultural and social value placed on beauty and fashion in the salon to dignify her own devalued labor. But she was also powerfully suggesting that the real world of fashion and beauty resides somewhere else. This alternative genealogy also resists the key logical and effective structure of the client and nail salon worker's relationship. Part of the mechanics by which fashion works as a lubricant in the intimate public of high-service salons is by trafficking in a fantasy about women's universal commitment to beauty and fashion. As a magazine I found in the salon put it, women all over the world are interested in looking their best. Although clients and body service workers in this expensive salon are for the most part starkly divided by economic security and immigration standing, race, nationality, and culture, the fantasy of a feminine essentialist love of beauty and fashion unites them in a seemingly borderless world. By creating a story in which the origins of fashion and beauty are situated far outside of the salon, Deepa refused this fantasy. For her, fashionable dress was not a sign of cozy feminine universalism, but of her own highly particular, precisely located familial and Nepali history. Clients might compliment the way Deepa put on style to lubricate their own experience of receiving body work, but chances are they never could really share it. Deepa's sharp eye for fashion also has the sharp edge of social critique. It undermines a cherished, some would say foundational, narrative of Western modernity and superiority. In the history of clothing, all dress could be seen as, quote, ethnic, that is, as geographically and culturally bounded, as the historian Kristen Hoganson points out. But of course, this is not how fashion has worked discursively. Instead, fashion has long served as an index of national and civilizational standing. To look to Paris, to New York, and London has meant that dress from everywhere else signifies marginality. Indeed, as Hoganson puts it, beginning in the 19th century, quote, to buy into the fashion system meant to distinguish oneself from penurious, colored, and colonized people, end of quote. Deepa's memory of her mother and sister's style defies this powerful narrative, disrupting the historical racialization and spatialization of fashion as exclusively European, American, and white. According to Deepa, Kathmandu, and not Paris in New York City, is the fashion and beauty capital of the world. In a purely economic calculus, the nail salon workers' expenditures on fast fashion don't make any sense. Everything we ever earned in tips went into clothes, Maya told me only half jokingly. But the cheap, chic clothes this group of body service workers wear to their jobs do at least two crucial things. One, they fulfill the owner's mandated dress code that the workers dress fashionably. And two, they re-emphasize the women's dignity and personhood in the context of labor that often erases it. For these workers then, personhood, subjectivity, and dignity can be produced through fast fashion. And this is something that fashion companies, advertisers, textile makers, and wearers all participate in. It's hard to imagine how the women could fulfill the owner's mandate or exercise this particular strategy of little freedom without a plentiful supply of cheap, new, fashionable clothing. We're almost done. By way of conclusion, I want to return to Elizabeth Klein and Lucy Siegel's books and to thinking about how accounting for the nail salon workers' use of fast fashion might shape the question of how to move forward with a critique of cheap chic in the aftermath of Rana Plaza. The body service workers who put on fast fashion to labor in the globalized, feminized service economy remain for Klein and Siegel unimagined subjects. Klein writes that cheap fashion results in, quote, the cheap, empty uniformity of cheapness. She announces the arrival of, quote, the so-called fashion democracy where everyone can afford to be stylish and follow trends, and she decries it. My wardrobe ultimately left me feeling slavish and passive, end of quote. The result is a classist disregard for fast fashion's users and their use, and is blind to the strategies of people such as the workers at the salon. When the ethnographic data I've been collecting at the nail salon is set next to the data presented in books like To Die For and Overdressed, two very different consumers emerge. Where Klein and Siegel's imagined fast fashion consumer is overstuffed, and blasé, the workers in the nail salon, by contrast, are interested, invested, actively involved in the use of fast fashion as the construction of their own personhoods and the continuation of a lineage of aesthetics. At the same time, the workers are required to wear fashionable clothes to their workplace. So part of my point is that when we think about fast fashion companies' massive global retail presence and the ever-growing number of fast fashion consumers, we can't use any singular form of consumption as the rubric to understand fast fashion users or the meanings that they attach to their clothing. But beyond this, when we complicate the paradigms we have of fast fashion users, we are also going to have to complicate the paradigms of how to respond to fast fashion. Because my point is not to revindicate fast fashion as some desirable value. I want to say that again. My point is not to revindicate fast fashion as some desirable value. The nail salon workers' use of fast fashion as a way to shore up their dignity and personhood doesn't justify the situation of textile workers in Bangladesh. And it doesn't mean that nail salon workers can't participate in change. To argue that the nail salon workers can't participate in change, or don't already, would reinscribe the partition of the sensible, to use Jacques Rancière's phrase, that renders some people visible as political actors while pushing others below the threshold of no. In other words, we should not abandon a critique of fast fashion. But the ethnographic evidence that not all fast fashion consumers are alike also indicates that consumers are not going to be, or maybe even that they should be, ethical in the same ways. My instinct is to say that any movement that is going to rely on the ethics of consumers is going to have to be rewritten. When we imagine an ethical subject, we will want to imagine the Klein and Siegel subject, and also the workers in the nail salon, and probably not many other consumers of fast fashion who still remain outside our imaginary, outside the regime of the visible. This represents the opportunity to better understand the uses of a massively circulating media, fast fashion, which has barely been explored. And at the same time, it's a reminder that the nail salon workers may have different ethical and political positions because of who they are. And this represents an opportunity to take into account other, less visible ethical and political possibilities. If ethical is taken in Foucault's sense of the arts of existence, i.e. all those actions and rules of conduct through which we organize ourselves according to particular ethical and aesthetic criteria, then the nail salon workers' practices, like Klein's and Siegel's, can be understood to presuppose a set of specific learned ethical competencies. For instance, in the case of the nail salon workers, wherein Cheap Chic helps them feel a measure of dignity and helps them fulfill what they understand to be a powerful ethical obligation to their families, who depend on the income they earn in the salon. It's worth pointing out that in the case of the nail salon workers, it's not that they are uneducated about how fast fashion is made, that they lack potentially transformative information, as we might suppose. Rather, their location vis-a-vis global capitalism is different than subjects we may be more familiar with, and their uses of fast fashion are different. And so my guess is that in the aftermath of Rana Plaza, we want as large and diverse a number of agents and repertoire of tactics to change the global garment industry as we can possibly get. Okay. Not at all. Not at all. Yeah.
So these are less questions than they are observations that I would love to hear your thoughts on.
Okay. That's fantastic.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.